A middle-aged couple came to the orphanage to adopt a child. Every child tried their hardest to force a smile. They were abandoned by their parents at birth. Waiting to be adopted was their destiny. In the end, the couple chose a sweet smiling girl. Watching another child get taken away, a little boy cried sadly. With a trembling voice, he asked the man beside him, "Why does nobody ever want to adopt me?" Homer comforted Heath, saying, "Only the most discerning people will choose you." But in saying that, Homer was really comforting himself as well. He was already in his 20s and had never left, a permanent fixture of the orphanage. The first time Homer was adopted, he was returned because he didn't cry. The second time, he did cry, but that was because his adoptive parents abused him. When the director found out, he quickly brought Homer back to the orphanage. After that, no couple ever wanted to adopt him again. A child who had been sent back twice, the orphanage became his only home, and the director was the only light in his life, a mentor and a father figure all in one. The director was an experienced gynecologist. Besides taking in abandoned infants, he also helped women with unplanned pregnancies. He treated Homer like his own son, giving him not only food and shelter, but also pouring all his knowledge into him, training him to become a skilled gynecologist. But age was taking its toll on the director. Plagued by severe insomnia, he could only fall asleep by inhaling ether meant for patients. As his energy faded, he hoped Homer would carry on his legacy, guard the orphanage, protect the helpless children, and help the desperate women who came to them. But Homer always carried a deep-seated barrier in his heart. Abandoned as an infant, he harbored deep resentment toward his birth parents, firmly believing that the guilty ones were the parents who abandoned their children, not the innocent babies. And deeply influenced by Christian teachings, he firmly believed that terminating a pregnancy was a sin, so he could never bring himself to agree with the director's practice of performing abortions in private. Meanwhile, Homer spent day after day in the orphanage, watching his peers get adopted one by one. While he remained trapped there, his longing for freedom and the outside world grew stronger and stronger. What finally broke the calm was a young couple who came seeking help. The man was a handsome Air Force pilot named Wally. He and his fiancée, Candy, had an unexpected pregnancy and came to the director for help. When Homer heard that Wally flew B-24 bombers, his eyes were full of envy. It was during World War II, and Wally asked why he wasn't serving. Homer explained that he had a heart condition and couldn't enlist. After the surgery, the longing that had built up in Homer for years finally broke through. He gathered his courage and asked Wally to give him a ride. He wanted to leave the orphanage and see the world. Warm-hearted Wally readily agreed. Homer practically ran to say goodbye to the director, his words bursting with hope and excitement. But the director's heart was full of reluctance and worry. He warned Homer that the outside world wasn't better than the orphanage. It was full of dangers, lies, and malice that he wouldn't know how to handle. But Homer was determined to go. Young people had to weather storms, even if they got bruised and battered. That was part of growing up. The director stood by the window, watching Homer's figure disappear down the road line with yellow and green, his concern turning into a helpless, heavy sigh.
Out in the world. Still a boy.
It was a crisp autumn day. Homer barely contained his excitement and nervousness. It was his first time leaving the orphanage, his first time heading into an unknown world. Wally's leave was short. The three of them traveled day and night. Along the way, they talked about everything: war, life, apple orchards, and the distant sea. When Wally learned Homer had nowhere else to go, he invited him to work at his family's apple orchard. Candy said it was a waste to have a doctor pick apples, but to Homer, everything outside was new and fascinating. On the way, Wally took a detour to show Homer the ocean, his first time seeing the sea. His eyes were full of awe. The magnificent view made him realize that the outside world was far larger than the orphanage. When they arrived at the orchard, everyone was surprised to see Homer. It was rare, in those days, for a white man to lower himself and work alongside them picking apples. Arthur, the foreman, exclaimed in surprise.
We're making history having this young man stay with us.
That night, Homer was assigned to the bunkhouse. When the black workers learned he could read, they were even more amazed and asked him to read the rules posted on the wall. Homer read them aloud. Rule 1, no smoking in bed. Rule 2, no operating machinery after drinking. The last three were even more ridiculous. But before he could continue, Arthur stopped him. Those rules didn't apply to people like them. They just needed to work hard and get paid. As for the restraints of civilization, those were reserved for the wealthy. Late at night, he couldn't help but think of the orphanage, where the director would say goodnight to them after every story.
Good night, you princes of Maine, you kings of New England.
Now, without that goodnight, Homer felt a little unaccustomed to it. During the day, Homer worked hard and steadily. Even though the work was manual labor, he didn't fall behind the experienced workers. Wally was about to return to the front, and he was concerned about whether Homer could handle the work. Homer said everything was fine and told him not to worry. But only days after Wally left, his young and beautiful fiancée began making eyes at Homer. When she heard he'd never had lobster, Candy had her father prepare a lobster feast for him. Besides that, Candy often took him to the movies. Life at the orchard wasn't always peaceful either. The workers were pressing bruised apples into juice. One worker casually flicked a cigarette butt into the juice barrel. Arthur saw it. He told the young man to fish it out, but the worker was defiant. He even pulled out a knife and tried to square up. Arthur wasn't someone to mess with. With a swift move, he slit the worker's raincoat, easily subduing him. The young man had no choice but to obey and retrieve the cigarette butt. Homer watched in admiration. He felt that skin color didn't determine a person's character, but human nature was far more complex than he'd imagined. Candy kept coming around to hang out with Homer. With each encounter, her behavior grew more forward. At the drive-in theater, she put her arm around him. At the beach, she jumped onto his back without hesitation. She picked up a piece of blue glass, smoothed and polished by countless waves, took Homer's hand to feel its warmth, and then casually tossed it away. Homer's instinct was to go after it. To her, it was just a moment's joy, but to Homer, it was all the sincerity he couldn't bear to let go of. Homer loved the sea. Candy loved the thrill. The sea breeze carried a charge of intimacy. They embraced by the shore, crossing a moral line and giving Wally a painful betrayal. Later, Candy even blamed Wally for everything.
He just leaves me here. What does he want? He wants me to just wait for him? Oh, God, he knows me. No, I'm not good at being alone.
Shifting blame onto others. That was the first lesson Homer learned after leaving the orphanage. One day, the director received a box of apples from Homer. Though they weren't the best quality, every bite the director took felt sweet. He never gave up on bringing Homer back, and had already forged a college diploma for him, even pulling strings to recommend him to higher-ups, so Homer could take over as director. The director knew Homer was just dazzled by the newness of the outside world, and that he would eventually realize the orphanage was his true home. After the apple-picking season ended, the workers packed up and moved on to their next job. Only Homer stayed behind. After they left, he and Candy grew bolder, almost inseparable. Wally's mother, worried Homer might get cold, brought him a thick quilt through the snow. But this kind woman had no idea that her future daughter-in-law was in Homer's room at that very moment. Since Homer left, the director's letters never stopped, every one of them filled with concern for him. He repeatedly reminded Homer not to forget he was a doctor. But Homer, swept up in romance, wrote back full of satisfaction with his new life, with no intention of returning. Another apple season came. The workers returned to the orchard. The black young man who had caused trouble before never showed up again. But Homer happened to notice something off about Arthur's daughter, Rose. As a gynecologist, he could tell she was pregnant, but he didn't know why she seemed so unhappy. Homer told Candy about it. Candy had been through an unplanned pregnancy herself. Maybe she could help Rose. Candy found Rose and asked if she didn't want the baby. Rose shook her head, but when Candy asked who the father was, Rose stayed silent. After Candy pressed her, she finally broke down and told the truth. Later, Candy rushed to find Homer. The truth was 10,000 times worse than what they'd done. The baby Rose was carrying was Arthur's. Homer's worldview shattered. Arthur was hardworking and honest, and doted on his daughter. No one could have imagined he would commit such an unspeakable, heinous act against his own child. Homer confronted him face to face, but Arthur showed no remorse. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He didn't even take it seriously. It wasn't until Homer told him Rose was pregnant that a flicker of panic and confusion crossed his face, and misfortune came in waves. An officer brought devastating news. Wally's plane had been shot down by the Japanese. He had survived, but was paralyzed from the waist down. For Wally's mother and Candy, it was a thunderbolt. Candy was crushed by guilt and grief. She suddenly realized that the man she truly loved was the one who had gone to war for his country. Everything with Homer had just been a moment of loneliness and weakness. That night, Homer saw Arthur blocking Rose, who was trying to run away. He knew it wasn't his place to interfere, but as a doctor, his sense of duty and conscience wouldn't let him stand by. So Homer got out his surgical tools, prepared to terminate Rose's pregnancy. The tools had been sent by the director, a constant reminder to Homer of who he was. He never expected they'd actually be used. Once, Homer had been dead set against it, but now, he finally understood that what the director did wasn't a sin. Sticking rigidly to Christian doctrine meant nothing. Saving a young girl's life was true compassion. After the procedure, Homer finally let go of his years-long misunderstanding of the director, and he came to understand that the so-called the cider house rules were nothing but empty words to the illiterate workers. True rules shouldn't be imposed from the outside, like shackles disconnected from reality. They should be made by the people who lived by them. The next day, everyone noticed Arthur hadn't come to work. Back in the bunkhouse, they were horrified. Arthur lay on his bed, covered in blood. After the procedure, Rose had made up her mind to escape. Arthur tried to stop her, but she stabbed him. With his last breath, he begged them, if the police asked how he died, to say it was from a broken heart after his daughter ran away. With Homer's nod, Arthur left the world with endless regret. Then Candy found Homer and apologized sincerely. She was going back to Wally to take care of him for the rest of her life. Their passionate affair was over. Though Homer felt reluctant and sad, he accepted the ending calmly. His first love had begun in absurdity and ended in guilt. Though it fizzled out, it taught him that the cost of desire was his alone to bear. What truly broke Homer was a letter from the orphanage. The director had passed away from an ether overdose. The old man who had treated him like a son, who had poured everything into him, was gone. Tears silently rolled down Homer's face. Along the way, he had seen the vastness of the ocean, tasted the deliciousness of lobster, felt the labor of apple picking, experienced the fleeting pleasure of love, and witnessed the ugliness of human nature, the collapse of morality, and the fragility of life. He finally understood that the outside world had both beauty and filth, warmth and cruelty, joy and despair. But no matter how wonderful the outside world was, it wasn't his home. The orphanage he had once longed to escape, the world that once felt like a cage, was where he was truly needed and where he truly belonged. On his way back, Homer saw Wally in a wheelchair, with Candy by his side, her eyes full of tenderness and resolve. The lovers, who had been through so much, were finally together again. Seeing them, Homer felt no more turmoil, only relief, and his resolve to go home grew even stronger. On a snowy winter morning, Homer finally returned to the orphanage. The children saw him and ran toward him, their pure joy warming his weathered heart. Later, a nurse at the orphanage told Homer the truth. He never had a heart condition. The director had lied to keep him from going to war. A kind-hearted deception. Homer wasn't surprised, only deeply moved. In the end, Homer took the director's place, becoming the guardian of the orphanage. He picked up the familiar storybook and read aloud to the children, just like the director used to. At the moment the lights were turned off, he imitated the director's gentle yet firm tone and said,
"Good night, you princes of Maine, you kings of New England."
Those words traveled through time, carrying care and responsibility, echoing through every corner of the orphanage. The director taught Homer, with his life, that kindness matters more than rules. And Homer taught us, through his journey, that growth is a process of making mistakes, waking up, and taking responsibility. There are no perfect people in this world. Everyone makes mistakes, but being able to admit mistakes and correct them, and being a person with boundaries and a sense of morality, can truly lead to self-redemption and growth.